What if I told you that the most powerful moments of your entire day aren't happening when you're wide awake, pushing through your to-do list, or grinding away at your goals? What if the real transformation, the genuine breakthrough you've been searching for in every self-help book, every meditation app, every motivational video, is actually occurring in those quiet hours when you think you're doing absolutely nothing at all? Think about it for a moment. You spend roughly 8 hours every single night in what most people consider a state of complete unconsciousness. That's 1/3 of your entire existence. If you live to be 80 years old, you'll have spent nearly 27 years with your eyes closed, seemingly disconnected from reality. Now, does it really make sense that nature, in all its infinite wisdom, would design us to waste almost 1/3 of our lives doing nothing meaningful? Or could there be something far more profound happening behind the scenes? Something that ancient civilizations understood intuitively, but that we've somehow forgotten in our modern rush. Has this ever happened to you? You go to bed completely stuck on a problem, wrestling with a decision that seems impossible to make, or struggling with a creative project that's hit a wall. Your mind is racing, you're frustrated, maybe even a bit anxious about it. Then you wake up the next morning, and suddenly, out of nowhere, the solution is crystal clear. It's as if someone whispered the answer in your ear while you were sleeping. Most people brush this off as coincidence, as their brain simply resting and resetting. But what if there's something far more intentional, far more powerful at work? But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. The truth is, we've been conditioned to believe that sleep is passive, that it's simply our body's way of recharging our batteries so we can face another day. We treat those nighttime hours as downtime, as lost productivity, as nothing more than biological maintenance. But what if I told you that during those hours, when your conscious mind finally stops its endless chatter, when your analytical brain takes a break from judging, doubting, and overthinking, something extraordinary happens? What if, in that mysterious space between waking and dreaming, you have access to a level of consciousness that's far more receptive, far more malleable, and infinitely more powerful than anything you experience during your busy daytime hours? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might completely transform the way you think about those 8 hours you spend in bed every night. The ancient wisdom keepers, the mystics, the shamans, they all knew something that modern science is only now beginning to understand. They recognized that the threshold between consciousness and sleep isn't just a biological transition, it's a sacred gateway. And if you know how to work with this gateway intentionally, if you understand the subtle mechanics of what's really happening during those liminal moments, you can literally reprogram the entire trajectory of your life. This isn't about lucid dreaming or some complex meditation technique that requires years of practice. This is about something far simpler, far more accessible, and paradoxically far more powerful. Because the secret lies not in what you do during the day, but in what you whisper to yourself in those precious moments right before sleep claims you. Let's put this into perspective for a moment, because the numbers alone are staggering. 27 years. That's how much of your life you'll spend asleep if you make it to 80. Think about that. 27 complete years where, according to conventional thinking, you're essentially offline, unavailable, disconnected from everything meaningful. To put it another way, if you're currently 30 years old, you've already spent a full decade of your existence in bed with your eyes closed. A decade. Now, does that sound like something nature would engineer without purpose? Does evolution really build in such a massive commitment of time and energy for something that's merely recuperative? The truth is, we've been looking at this completely backwards. We've been taught to view sleep as the interruption, as the necessary evil that steals time from our productive waking hours. We push it off, we cut it short, we see it as something to minimize so we can maximize our real living. But what if our nighttime hours aren't the interruption at all? What if they're actually the main event, and everything we do during the day is simply preparation for what happens when we finally surrender to sleep? This isn't New Age philosophy or wishful thinking. The ancient world understood something profound about the nature of consciousness and the hidden architecture of reality that we've somehow lost in our rush toward modernity. The Egyptian priests didn't build elaborate dream temples and develop complex rituals around sleep because they had nothing better to do. These were some of the most advanced minds of their time. People who built structures that still baffle modern engineers, who understood mathematics and astronomy with precision that seems almost impossible for their era. They dedicated enormous resources and attention to the study of what happens during those nighttime hours. Why? Because they recognized that the sleeping state wasn't an absence of consciousness. It was a different kind of consciousness entirely, one that operated under completely different rules. If this resonated with you, subscribe to the channel. There's so much more we're going to explore together, and I don't want you to miss what's coming next. The Tibetan monks spent lifetimes developing practices around sleep yoga, techniques designed to maintain awareness during the dream state, not because they wanted interesting experiences, but because they understood that the boundary between waking and sleeping is where real transformation becomes possible. These weren't primitive people operating on superstition. These were individuals who had dedicated their entire existence to understanding the mechanics of mind and reality, and they all arrived at the same conclusion through different paths. The night is not empty, it's full of possibility, full of power, full of potential that remains completely untapped by most people because they don't even know it exists. The mystics of Alexandria, those brilliant minds who gathered in one of history's greatest centers of learning, they studied the states of consciousness with the same rigor that modern scientists study particle physics. They mapped the territories of awareness, they experimented, they kept detailed records, and they discovered something extraordinary. They found that during those liminal moments, when you're neither fully awake nor fully asleep, your consciousness becomes like soft clay, infinitely moldable, ready to receive impressions that will harden into the experiences of your tomorrow. They understood that the thoughts you hold, the intentions you set, the declarations you make in those precious minutes, before sleep claims you completely, these aren't just fleeting mental events. They're seeds being planted in the most fertile ground imaginable. Now, I want to go even deeper into this understanding because there's a hidden mechanism at work here that changes everything once you see it. Your conscious mind, that voice in your head that never seems to stop talking, that's constantly analyzing, judging, worrying, planning, it's actually the weakest part of your consciousness when it comes to creating real change. It's loud, it's persistent, but it's surface level. During your waking hours, this conscious mind acts like a gatekeeper, blocking most of what you're trying to accomplish because it's designed to protect you by keeping everything the same. It filters every new idea through your past experiences, through your learned limitations, through every failure and disappointment you've ever had. This is why affirmations feel empty during the day, why visualization exercises often produce minimal results when you practice them in your living room with your eyes squeezed shut, trying to force something to happen. You're working against this incredibly powerful defensive system that's designed to maintain the status quo. But when you cross that threshold into sleep, something remarkable happens. That gatekeeper clocks out. Write in the comments, the gatekeeper is resting, if you're starting to see how this changes everything about your approach to transformation. The critical insight here is understanding what actually happens in that space when the gatekeeper steps aside. You've experienced this countless times without recognizing it for what it truly is. Remember that project at work that had you completely stumped. You spent hours, maybe even days, turning it over in your mind, approaching it from every conceivable angle, getting more frustrated with each failed attempt. Then, exhausted and defeated, you finally gave up and went to bed. And the next morning, before you even had your coffee, before you fully opened your eyes, there it was, the solution. Crystal clear, obvious, perfect. You probably thought to yourself, how did I not see this before? But here's the thing, you couldn't see it before. Not because you weren't smart enough or trying hard enough, but because the very act of trying was blocking your access to the deeper intelligence that only emerges when you stop trying. This phenomenon isn't random luck, or your brain finally getting enough rest to think clearly again. What's actually happening is far more profound and far more useful once you understand the mechanics behind it. During those nighttime hours, your consciousness isn't shutting down, it's shifting frequencies. It's moving from the beta brainwave state, where your logical, analytical mind dominates, into theta and delta states, where an entirely different kind of processing takes over. In these deeper states, your mind can make connections that are literally impossible during your normal waking consciousness. It can access information stored in places your conscious mind doesn't know how to reach. It can see patterns that your daytime awareness is too narrowly focused to recognize. Think of it like this. Your waking mind is like someone standing with their nose pressed against a massive wall, trying to understand what the wall is by examining the texture of the bricks right in front of them. They can describe those individual bricks in great detail, but they have absolutely no idea what the overall structure looks like, where it leads, or what purpose it serves. Your sleeping mind is like stepping back and rising up until you can see the entire wall from above, understanding in an instant that it's not just a wall, it's part of a labyrinth, and from this vantage point, the path through becomes obvious. This shift in perspective isn't metaphorical. It's a genuine change in how your consciousness processes information and solves in problems. But there's something even more fascinating happening in those moments, right at the edge of sleep, that strange twilight zone where you're no longer fully awake, but not yet completely asleep either. Most people rush through this space, barely noticing it exists. They're either wide awake or they're out cold, with just a few seconds of transition in between. But this liminal space, this threshold between states of consciousness, this is where real magic becomes possible. It's in these moments that the ordinary rules governing your reality become flexible, negotiable, open to influence, in ways that simply aren't available at any other time. Your unconscious mind, that vast reservoir of intelligence and creative power that operates beneath your everyday awareness, it's always working in the background, processing, connecting, organizing. But during your waking hours, it's like trying to hear a whisper in a crowded restaurant. The signal is there, but it's drowned out by all the noise of your conscious thoughts, your worries, your mental to-do lists, your reactions to everything happening around you. When you slip into that space between waking and sleeping, the noise drops away. Suddenly, that whisper becomes audible. More than audible, it becomes the only voice speaking, and it has direct access to plant information, insights, and intentions deep into your consciousness without any interference. This is the territory where your deepest intentions can take root. Not the surface-level wants that change every other day, but the core desires that define who you're becoming and what you're creating with your life. When you learn to work with this space intentionally, when you understand that those few minutes before sleep are actually a doorway into the most powerful programming interface you have access to, everything changes. You're no longer just hoping for breakthrough insights to arrive randomly. You're actively cultivating them, planting them deliberately, creating the conditions for transformation to unfold naturally. Now, I want to go even deeper into what makes this liminal space so uniquely powerful, because there's a specific quality to consciousness in these moments that doesn't exist anywhere else. Your rational mind, with all its defenses and limitations, it operates on a frequency of doubt and analysis. But as you drift towards sleep, your consciousness shifts into a state of pure receptivity. It's like soil that's been tilled and prepared, waiting for whatever seeds you choose to plant. And here's the crucial part that most people miss entirely. The seeds you plant in this moment don't just sit there waiting. They begin germinating immediately, working through the night while you sleep, developing roots that will determine what blooms in your waking life. Put in the comments, "I understand the power of the threshold," if this is starting to click for you. What I'm sharing with you right now isn't something I pulled from the latest bestseller or some trending personal development course. This understanding has been around for thousands of years, carefully preserved and passed down through lineages of teachers who recognized its immense power. The mystery schools of ancient Egypt, the esoteric traditions of Tibet, the hidden teachings of the Essenes, they all guarded this knowledge closely, not because they wanted to keep it from people, but because they understood that most people weren't ready to use it responsibly. They knew that when you have access to the programming layer of consciousness itself, when you can actually influence the substrate from which your reality emerges, you're working with something profoundly powerful. But here's what's changed. We're living in a time where this knowledge doesn't need to be hidden anymore. The information is available, the understanding is accessible, and most importantly, you don't need to spend 20 years in a monastery or undergo elaborate initiations to put this into practice. You can start tonight, literally tonight. Before you go to bed, in those few minutes when you're lying there waiting for sleep to arrive, you have an opportunity that most people waste completely. They use those moments to worry about tomorrow, to replay the day's frustrations, to mentally run through everything that went wrong or could go wrong. And in doing so, they're planting seeds too. Just not the ones they'd choose if they understood what they were doing. The beauty of this approach is its simplicity. You're not learning complex visualization techniques or memorizing elaborate rituals. You're not trying to achieve some special state of consciousness that takes years to master. You're simply working with the natural rhythm of your awareness, catching that wave right as it's about to break into sleep, and using those precious moments intentionally rather than accidentally. The results that come from this practice won't make sense to your logical mind. You'll find yourself in the right place at the right time with a frequency that seems beyond coincidence. Opportunities will appear that perfectly match what you declared in those nighttime moments. Solutions will emerge fully formed, as if they were delivered to you while you slept. And the thing is, they were. Let me paint you a picture that probably feels familiar. It's late on a Thursday night, and you're lying in bed staring at the ceiling. There's a situation at work that's been eating at you for days. Maybe it's a conflict with a colleague that's escalated beyond what you know how to handle. Or perhaps it's a project that's due Monday and you've hit a complete wall. You've tried every approach you can think of, and nothing's working. Your mind is churning, running through the same scenarios over and over, getting more tangled with each iteration. You can feel the tension in your shoulders, the knot in your stomach. Finally, exhausted from the mental gymnastics, you surrender to sleep. Then morning comes. You open your eyes, and before you even fully remember why you were stressed, the answer is there. Not a vague sense of direction, but a clear, complete solution. You can see exactly what needs to be said, exactly what needs to be done, and you wonder how you possibly missed something so obvious. But you didn't miss it. Your waking mind couldn't access it because it was too busy spinning in circles, too locked into patterns of thought that were never going to lead anywhere productive. It was only when you stepped out of the way, when you surrendered control and allowed a deeper intelligence to work on the problem, that the breakthrough became possible. This isn't your brain randomly stumbling onto an answer during its nightly filing and organizing routine. What's happening is far more intentional and far more powerful. During those hours of deep sleep, you're not disconnected from your challenges and questions. You're connected to them at a level that transcends your usual analytical approach. You're accessing a form of intelligence that doesn't operate through logic and linear thinking, but through pattern recognition and intuitive knowing that can see solutions your conscious mind is literally incapable of perceiving. It's like upgrading from a two-dimensional map to a three-dimensional hologram where suddenly every connection and pathway becomes visible at once. But the real revelation here is understanding that you don't have to wait passively for these breakthrough moments to happen randomly. You don't have to just hope that you'll wake up with clarity about your problems. You can actively engage with this process, deliberately setting the stage for insights to emerge, intentionally planting the questions and intentions that you want your deeper consciousness to work on while you sleep. This is where the ancient wisdom and modern understanding converge into something immediately practical and undeniably powerful. Leave a comment saying, "I'm ready to plant intentionally," if you're seeing how this transforms your entire relationship with both sleep and problem solving. The key to understanding what's really happening during those nighttime hours lies in recognizing that you're not just one unified consciousness operating at different energy levels throughout the day. You're actually multiple layers of awareness, each with its own capabilities, its own access to information, and its own way of processing reality. The version of you that's navigating your daytime life, making decisions, solving problems, interacting with people, that's just the surface layer. It's the part that's been trained and conditioned by your experiences, shaped by your education, limited by your past failures and successes. This conscious self has learned what's possible and what's not, what you're capable of and what's beyond your reach. It carries every limiting belief you've ever absorbed, every piece of negative feedback. You've internalized every disappointment that taught you to lower your expectations. But when you cross that threshold into sleep, something remarkable happens. This conditioned, limited version of you steps back, and another dimension of your being comes forward. This isn't some mystical concept or metaphorical way of speaking. This is a genuine aspect of your consciousness that operates under completely different rules. This part of you has no concept of impossible because it wasn't present. For all those times you were told you couldn't do something, it has no fear of failure because it doesn't carry the emotional weight of past mistakes. It isn't bound by the logical constraints that keep your waking mind locked into familiar patterns of thinking. This deeper intelligence is like meeting the version of yourself who never got wounded, never got discouraged, never learned to doubt. During your daytime hours, you're essentially working with handicapped awareness, not because you're deficient in any way, but because your conscious mind has been trained to focus narrowly, to filter out most of reality in order to function in the practical demands of daily life. You're trying to solve complex, multidimensional problems with a consciousness that can only see in two dimensions. It's like trying to navigate a labyrinth while looking through a keyhole. You can see the wall directly in front of you, you can make out some details, but you have absolutely no sense of the overall layout, no understanding of where the path leads or how all the corridors connect. Then night arrives and suddenly that keyhole view expands. Your sleeping consciousness has access to the aerial view, the blueprint, the complete map. It can see connections between things that seemed unrelated during the day. It can recognize patterns that span across years of your life, tying together experiences and information in ways that create sudden clarity and understanding. This isn't about your brain randomly firing neurons while it consolidates memories. This is about accessing a level of intelligence that's always there, always operating, but that gets drowned out by the noise and limitation of your waking awareness. Think about those moments of insight that seem to come from nowhere. You're in the shower, or driving, or just waking up, and suddenly you understand something that's been puzzling you for months. You see how two completely separate areas of your life are actually connected. You recognize a solution that combines elements from different domains in a way you never would have thought to try. These aren't random accidents of brain chemistry. These are glimpses of what your deeper consciousness sees all the time. It's working with a complete puzzle, while your waking mind has been struggling with scattered pieces, not even realizing that most of the picture is missing. This expanded awareness during sleep is why children often wake up with such radical shifts in their understanding and capabilities. It's why you can go to bed frustrated about a skill you're learning and wake up suddenly able to do it. Your conscious practice during the day provides the raw material, but the actual integration and mastery happen during those nighttime hours when your deeper intelligence can work without interference. It takes all those fragmented attempts, all those partial understandings, and weaves them into genuine capability while you're completely unaware that anything significant is happening. Now, I want to go even deeper into how you can work with this expanded consciousness intentionally, because once you understand that you have access to this dimension of awareness, the natural question becomes, how do you communicate with it? How do you direct its attention towards specific challenges or questions? How do you ensure that this deeper intelligence is working on what matters most to you, rather than just processing whatever happens to be floating around in your mind? The answer lies in understanding the language this part of you speaks and the timing of when it's most receptive. Write in the comments, "My deeper self is always working," if you're starting to recognize that there's so much more happening beneath the surface than you ever realized. The ancient masters weren't operating on faith or hope when they developed their practices around nighttime consciousness. They were working from direct observation and rigorous experimentation over generations. These teachers understood something that modern culture has completely lost sight of, that the moment you lie down to sleep isn't the end of your productive day. It's actually the beginning of the most important work you'll do. They recognized that crossing into sleep is like entering a laboratory where the fundamental code of your reality is exposed and accessible in ways it never is during your waking hours. This wasn't mysticism for them, it was practical technology. Think about what a laboratory actually is. It's a controlled environment where you can isolate variables, run experiments, and observe results without the interference of outside factors. Your sleeping consciousness functions exactly the same way. During your waking hours, you're constantly bombarded with sensory input, social demands, emotional reactions, and mental chatter. You're trying to create change while standing in the middle of a hurricane. But when you enter sleep, all that external noise drops away. The laboratory becomes quiet, controlled, ready for precise work. This is when you can actually reprogram patterns that would be impossible to shift during the chaos of your day. The metaphor of your mind as a garden isn't just poetic imagery. It's an accurate description of how consciousness actually works. During your daytime hours, that garden is absolutely chaotic. There are people walking through constantly, trampling things, planting weeds without asking, digging things up. There's wind-blowing debris everywhere. There are animals running around, birds pecking at seeds before they can take root. The sun is beating down intensely, drying out the soil. In that environment, even if you try to plant something intentional, something you genuinely want to grow in your life, the chances of it surviving long enough to establish roots are minimal. It gets crowded out, stepped on, dried up, or eaten before it has any chance to develop. But watch what happens when night falls on that garden. All the activity stops, the visitors leave, the animals settle down, the harsh sun disappears, the air cools and moisture returns to the soil. Everything becomes still, quiet, receptive. This is the ideal environment for planting, not despite the darkness, but because of it. Seeds need darkness to germinate. They need that protected, quiet space where they can send down roots without being disturbed. Your intentions work exactly the same way. The declarations you make, the visions you hold, the transformations you're calling into your life, they need that protected darkness of your sleeping consciousness to take root properly. What makes this nighttime planting so powerful is the quality of the soil itself during these hours. Your conscious mind during the day is like hard, compacted earth. You can try to push seeds into it, but they'll just sit on the surface, exposed and vulnerable. Your sleeping consciousness is like perfectly tilled, moist, nutrient-rich soil that's been prepared specifically for planting. When you place an intention into this soil, it doesn't just sit there, it immediately begins to take root. The moment you whisper what you want to grow in your life, right as you're drifting into sleep, that soil accepts it completely, without question, without resistance, and begins the process of transformation. This is why timing matters so much. You could plant the same exact intention, use the same exact words, hold the same exact vision in your mind during the middle of the afternoon, and it would have a fraction of the impact. Not because the intention itself is weak, but because you're trying to plant in the wrong conditions. It's like trying to garden during a thunderstorm versus gardening on a perfect spring evening. The seed is the same, but the environment determines whether it thrives or fails. Your nighttime consciousness provides the perfect environment every single night, without you having to create it or force it. It's a natural rhythm, a built-in cycle that's been operating your entire life, waiting for you to recognize it and work with it intentionally. The ancient teachers understood this so clearly that they built entire practices around it. They didn't meditate only during the day. They didn't do their visualizations only when the sun was up. They saved their most important inner work for those threshold moments right before sleep, because they knew that's when the soil was most receptive, when the garden was most ready, when their intentions would have maximum impact with minimum resistance. They were working with nature, not against it, using the natural architecture of consciousness rather than trying to override it through force of will. Now, I want to go even deeper into the actual mechanics of how you work with this nighttime soil, because it's not enough to just understand that this time is powerful. You need to know specifically what to plant, how to plant it, and what language your sleeping consciousness actually responds to. Drop a comment saying, "My garden is ready," if you're beginning to see that you've had access to the perfect growing conditions this entire time. The reason nighttime declarations are so much more powerful than daytime affirmations comes down to one simple truth. Your ego isn't there to block them. During your waking hours, every time you try to declare something new about yourself, every time you attempt to affirm a reality that doesn't match your current circumstances, you run into immediate resistance. Let's say you're struggling financially and you try to tell yourself during the day, "I am abundant, I am prosperous, money flows to me easily." What happens? Instantly, your logical mind jumps in with objections. Really? Have you looked at your bank account? Remember last month when you couldn't pay that bill? Remember all the times you've tried to improve your finances and failed? This inner critic isn't trying to hurt you, it's actually trying to protect you by maintaining consistency with what it knows to be true based on past evidence. This protective mechanism made sense in our evolutionary past. If you thought you could fly and jumped off a cliff, that would be the end of you. So we developed this internal reality checker that constantly compares what we're claiming against what we've experienced. The problem is, This same mechanism that keeps us from doing dangerous things also keeps us trapped in limiting patterns. It blocks any attempt to grow beyond your current identity, because growth by definition means claiming something that isn't yet true in your external circumstances. You have to become it internally before it can manifest externally. But your ego won't let you become it internally, because it's not yet manifest externally. It's a perfect trap. But here's where the magic of that threshold moment comes in. As you drift towards sleep, your ego's grip loosens. That vigilant guardian that's been blocking every attempt at transformation starts to fade. The critical voice gets quieter, the objections lose their power, and in that space of reduced resistance, when you whisper an intention or make a declaration about who you are and what you're becoming, it doesn't hit a wall of doubt. It slips right past the gatekeeper and plants itself directly in your subconscious, where it begins to work immediately, reshaping your internal landscape without any argument or resistance. This is why people can practice affirmations for months during the day and see minimal results. But when they shift the same practice to that liminal space before sleep, everything changes. Same words, same intentions, completely different results. The difference isn't the content, it's the timing and the absence of resistance. You're working with the natural opening that occurs every single night, rather than fighting against the natural closing that dominates your daytime consciousness. And here's something most people completely miss. There are actually two of these powerful threshold moments available to you every single day. The first is the one we've been discussing, that space when you're lying down and drifting from waking into sleep. This is your evening gateway, but there's an equally powerful morning gateway that most people blow right past without even noticing it exists. It's that moment, right when you first wake up, before you're fully conscious, before your thinking mind has ramped up to full speed, when you're suspended between the dream world and the physical world. In this morning threshold, you're emerging from that laboratory of deep consciousness, and you're still carrying the frequency of whatever got programmed during the night. This is the moment to reinforce, to claim, to declare once more before your ego fully comes online and starts running its usual programs. Most people grab their phone, immediately filling this sacred space with other people's thoughts, other people's agendas, other people's energy. They waste the morning gateway completely, not realizing they just missed one of the two most powerful moments of their entire day. Think of these two gateways as bookends. The evening threshold is when you plant and program. The morning threshold is when you water and affirm what you planted. Together, they create a complete cycle of transformation. You're not just hoping that change happens randomly, you're actively participating in the architecture of your own evolution twice a day, every day, using the natural rhythm of your consciousness rather than fighting against it. The beautiful simplicity of this approach is that you don't need to add anything to your routine. You're already lying down at night. You're already waking up in the morning. These moments are built into your life. The only shift required is becoming aware of them, recognizing them for the powerful gateways they are, and using them intentionally instead of unconsciously. Leave a comment saying, "I claim both gateways," if you're ready to stop wasting these two daily opportunities for profound transformation. I need to be really clear about something here, because there's a crucial distinction that will determine whether you actually get results from this or whether it becomes just another thing you try for a week and then abandon. What we're talking about isn't some trendy new technique that someone invented last year and packaged into a course. This isn't the latest personal development hack that'll be replaced by something else next month. This understanding has survived literally thousands of years, passed down through lineages of teachers who guarded it carefully, not because they wanted to keep secrets, but because they understood its profound power and knew it had to be transmitted properly to be effective. The reason this wisdom has endured across millennia, through the fall of empires and the rise of new civilizations, through periods of persecution where this knowledge had to go underground, is simple. It works at a level that transcends culture, language, and belief systems. It doesn't matter whether you're religious or secular, scientific or spiritual, optimistic or skeptical. This isn't based on faith or positive thinking. It's based on working with the actual architecture of human consciousness, with patterns that don't change regardless of what century you're living in or what society you're part of. Most modern approaches to personal transformation are trying to force change through willpower and repetition during your least receptive state. They have you standing in front of a mirror during the day, trying to convince yourself of something while your ego is fully armed and ready to shoot down every claim that doesn't match your current reality. It's like trying to plant a garden during a hurricane. You can do it technically, but you're working against enormous resistance, and the chances of anything actually taking root are minimal. These approaches generate a lot of effort, a lot of frustration, and minimal lasting change, which is why people cycle through technique after technique, always hoping the next one will finally be the answer. What makes this nighttime approach fundamentally different is that it's not fighting against your nature, it's flowing with it. Your consciousness already moves through these cycles every single day. You already shift from that active, analytical, resistant daytime state into that receptive, open, malleable nighttime state. This happens whether you're aware of it or not. The system isn't asking you to create some special condition that requires years of training. It's asking you to recognize a condition that already exists and use it intentionally. During your waking hours, your rational mind is running its program constantly. It's evaluating everything you encounter, comparing it to past experiences, making judgments, generating doubts, protecting you by maintaining the status quo. This is exhausting, and it's also why real transformation is so difficult during the day. You're essentially trying to reprogram a computer while it's running complex calculations. The system is too busy defending its current operations to accept new code. But when you prepare for sleep, when you settle into bed and begin to release the day, something shifts in your internal environment. That busy, defensive, analytical program starts to power down. The protective barriers begin to dissolve. And in that space of reduced resistance, when you whisper your deepest intentions, they don't encounter the same walls of doubt and objection. This is the magic that happens naturally every night. If you know how to work with it, you're not forcing anything. You're not battling your own mind. You're not trying to override your natural skepticism through sheer repetition. You're simply waiting for that moment when the door opens by itself, and then you're walking through it with your intentions held clearly in your awareness. The door opens every night. Most people just don't notice it's there because they're too busy replaying the day's problems or worrying about tomorrow's challenges. They're unconscious during the most powerful moment of their entire day. Now, I want to go even deeper into what actually happens in your consciousness during this transition, because understanding the mechanism makes it exponentially more powerful when you grasp not just what to do, but why it works. When you can feel the shift happening as you cross that threshold, you move from blindly following a technique to consciously wielding a profound tool. There's a specific quality to the thoughts and words you hold during this liminal space that determines whether you're just daydreaming or actually programming transformation. Write in the comments, "I work with nature now," if you're feeling the relief of finally having an approach that doesn't require you to fight yourself. The profound shift that happens in that liminal space isn't just about reduced resistance, it's about a fundamental change in the nature of communication itself. During your waking hours, when you think about what you want or try to declare who you're becoming, those thoughts and words have a certain quality to them. They're requests, hopes, wishes, or at best, affirmations that you're trying to convince yourself to believe. There's a tentativeness to them, a questioning, energy even when you're trying to be confident. But when you cross into that threshold state, when that inner critic goes offline and you whisper your intentions into the fertile darkness of your consciousness, something extraordinary happens to the nature of those words. They stop being requests and become commands, not forceful, aggressive commands that you're shouting at the universe, demanding compliance. These are quiet commands, whispers that carry the weight of absolute authority, because they're being spoken directly to the part of you that doesn't question, doesn't doubt, doesn't need convincing. Your deeper consciousness doesn't evaluate your declarations for truthfulness or reasonableness. It simply receives them as instructions and begins reorganizing everything to match what you've declared. It's like the difference between asking a search engine to please maybe find something if it's not too much trouble, versus typing in a clear command and hitting enter. One is tentative and weak. The other is direct and activates immediate response. This is why the ancient teachers called this practice speaking to the sleeping universe. They weren't being poetic, they were being precise. When you're in that state between waking and sleeping, you're not separate from the universe. You're connected to it in a way that doesn't exist during your normal waking consciousness. The boundaries blur. Your individual awareness merges with something larger. And in that merged state, what you declare about yourself isn't just your personal opinion or hopeful thinking. It becomes an instruction to the organizing intelligence that's constantly shaping your reality. The universe, or whatever term you prefer for the creative force behind existence, hears these whispered commands and responds with, "Yes, understood, implementing now." Most people spend their entire lives searching externally for the keys to transformation. They're looking for the right teacher, the right book, the right seminar, the right technique that will finally unlock their potential and give them access to the life they know is possible. They're on an endless quest, always feeling like the answer must be out there somewhere, just beyond their current reach. And all the while, they're carrying the most powerful treasure map that's ever existed right inside their own consciousness. The territories you need to explore aren't on any physical map. They're the hidden dimensions of your own awareness, the secret gardens of possibility that exist within you, waiting to be discovered and cultivated. These ancestral teachings aren't pointing you towards some distant destination that requires years of pilgrimage to reach. They're showing you that you've been standing at the entrance to paradise every single night of your life, but you've been walking past it unconsciously because no one ever told you to look there. The treasure isn't buried on some remote island. It's not locked in a vault that only special people can access. It's in territories of your own being that have been there all along, vast and rich and ready to yield whatever you need, but completely overlooked because your attention has been trained to look outward rather than inward, to seek during the day rather than discover during the night. Every time you lie down and cross into sleep, you're actually entering the most valuable real estate in existence. You're stepping into inner landscapes where the rules of ordinary reality don't apply, where transformation happens at speeds that would be impossible in the external world, where seeds planted today can bloom tomorrow in ways that seem miraculous from the outside, but are simply natural when you understand the mechanics. These inner territories aren't fixed or static. They reshape themselves based on what you bring to them, based on the intentions you plant, based on the declarations you make as you cross the threshold. Now, I want to go even deeper into how you actually navigate these inner territories, because it's not enough to just know they exist. You need to understand what language they respond to, what kind of seeds take root there, and what specific practices will give you reliable access to this inner treasure. The difference between someone who reads about this and someone who actually transforms their life through this understanding comes down to knowing exactly what to do in those precious moments before sleep claims you completely. Drop a comment saying, "The treasure is within," if you're recognizing that you've been searching in all the wrong places for something you've had access to every single night. The most radical truth hidden in this ancient wisdom is something that will completely shift your understanding of who you are and what's possible for you. Right now, in this moment, you're experiencing one version of yourself, one particular configuration of your potential. But that's not the only version that exists. Within your consciousness, there are infinite possible versions of you, each representing a different pathway, a different set of choices, a different expression of your potential. There's a version of you that's already abundant, already confident, already living the life you're working toward. That version isn't hypothetical or imaginary. It exists right now as a potential configuration of your being, waiting to be activated and brought into your lived experience. These different versions of yourself aren't locked away in some inaccessible realm. They're right there in those inner gardens we've been talking about, existing as seeds of possibility that can bloom into your reality when given the right conditions. During your daytime consciousness, you're locked into experiencing only the version of yourself that matches your current beliefs, habits, and patterns. It's like being stuck in one room of a mansion with hundreds of rooms, thinking that single room is all that exists. But when you cross into that threshold state before sleep, the walls between these different versions become permeable. You can actually reach across and touch those other possibilities, claim them, begin the process of bringing them from potential into manifestation. The seeds you plant in that protected darkness aren't just positive thoughts or wishful thinking. They're actual transmissions of information from one version of you to another. You're essentially sending a message from your current self to your potential self, saying, "I see you, I claim you, I'm choosing to become you." And because you're doing this in the state where your ego isn't interfering, where your limiting beliefs aren't blocking the signal, that message gets through clearly and begins the process of transformation immediately. Your rational mind might consider these possibilities impossible, but impossibility is just a judgment your conscious mind makes based on limited information. Your deeper consciousness doesn't recognize impossible, it only recognizes potential, and during the night it works on bringing that potential into form. Let me share a story that illustrates this perfectly, because hearing about these principles abstractly is one thing, but seeing how they actually work in someone's life makes it real. There was a merchant named Michael Rodriguez who lived in Damascus centuries ago. He'd inherited his family's silk trading business, a legacy that had been prosperous for generations. But by the time we meet Michael in this story, everything had collapsed. His stall that used to overflow with the finest silks was nearly empty. The few pieces he had left were faded and worn. Customers walked right past him without even glancing at his offerings. His debts had grown so large that he was facing complete ruin, and every night he went to bed feeling like a failure, wondering how he'd let everything fall apart so completely. One evening, at his lowest point, something extraordinary happened. An old woman appeared at his stall just as he was closing up for the day. She looked at his sad collection of silk pieces and said something that made no sense to him at first. She told him that his silk was crying because it remembered when he used to speak to it with power, when his ancestors understood that fabric itself could carry intention and transform reality. Michael thought she was crazy, but she persisted, explaining that during the hours between dusk and dawn, when the veils between worlds are thinnest, words spoken with true intention don't just disappear into the air, they weave themselves into the very fabric of reality, literally in his case. She taught him that his ancestors had a practice he'd never learned. They would sleep among their finest silks, and as they drifted into that threshold state, they would whisper their intentions into the fabric, declaring abundance, prosperity, success. The silk would absorb these declarations during the night, and Somehow, mysteriously, customers could feel it when they touched the fabric later. It carried a frequency of prosperity that attracted wealth naturally. Michael was desperate enough to try anything, so that night he took his last piece of fine silk, laid it out on his bed, and as he drifted towards sleep, he whispered into it over and over, "I am abundance, I am prosperity, I am success." He felt ridiculous at first, but then something shifted as he crossed into that liminal space, and the words stopped feeling like empty affirmations and started feeling like truth. Now I want to go even deeper into what happened next for Michael, because his story reveals something crucial about how this process actually works in the real world, beyond just theory and principle. Write in the comments, "I speak to my reality," if you're beginning to understand that your words during those sacred hours aren't just thoughts disappearing into nothing. What the old woman revealed to Michael wasn't just a technique for speaking to fabric. She was showing him something far more fundamental about how consciousness and reality actually interact. She explained that there are certain words that carry inherent creative power, and at the top of that hierarchy is the phrase "I am." These two words aren't just a grammatical construction for describing yourself. They're actually a declaration of being that resonates at a frequency your deeper consciousness recognizes as absolute truth. When you say, "I am," followed by anything, you're not describing a current condition. You're actually calling a potential reality into existence through the act of declaring it. The reason this works so powerfully during those hours between dusk and dawn is that consciousness itself becomes more fluid during these times. The boundaries between what is and what could be become permeable. Your rational mind that normally says, "But that's not true yet," isn't there to block the signal. So when Michael whispered, "I am abundance," into that silk as he drifted towards sleep, he wasn't trying to convince himself of something false. He was actually reaching into the field of all possibilities and selecting a version of himself where abundance was already his natural state, then claiming it, activating it, beginning the process of collapsing that potential into his lived reality. What happened over the next several nights transformed Michael's entire understanding of how life works. He continued the practice, and something strange began to occur. The silk itself seemed to change. It wasn't the physical properties shifting, though customers who saw it later swore the colors looked richer. The fabric felt more luxurious. What was really changing was the energetic signature the silk carried. It had absorbed Michael's declarations during those liminal hours, and now it radiated a frequency of prosperity that people could feel even if they couldn't explain it. Customers who had been walking past his stall for months suddenly felt drawn to stop. They'd pick up a piece of silk and feel compelled to buy it, not quite understanding why, but unable to resist. But the even deeper revelation came when Michael realized that the silk was just a training tool. What he was really learning to work with was his own consciousness. The silk was receptive, malleable, ready to absorb whatever intention he placed into it during those sacred hours. And his sleeping mind, he discovered, functioned exactly the same way. It was like silk at the quantum level, a fabric of pure potential that would take on whatever pattern he impressed upon it with his declarations. When he said, "I am abundance," as he crossed into sleep, his consciousness absorbed that declaration, just like the silk absorbed it, and throughout the night it worked on reorganizing his entire being to match that frequency. This is the hidden truth that changes everything once you really grasp it. You don't need physical silk or any external object. To practice this, your own awareness is already the most receptive, most powerful fabric in existence. Every night when you lie down, you're essentially lying on a bed of pure potential, and the declarations you make as you drift towards sleep are being woven directly into the structure of your consciousness. They're not just thoughts that come and go. They're instructions that your deeper intelligence receives and begins implementing immediately. Michael's business didn't just recover, it flourished beyond anything his family had achieved in previous generations. But more importantly, he understood something that most people never discover, that reality isn't fixed and solid the way it appears. It's actually responsive, fluid, constantly reorganizing itself based on the patterns of consciousness we're broadcasting, especially during those hours when our defensive mechanisms are offline and we're operating from that deeper, more powerful level of being. The I am declarations work because they're not requests or hopes, they're statements of identity. And your identity, who you understand yourself to be at the deepest level, is the primary organizing principle of your entire experience. Change your identity, and everything else shifts to match it. But you can't change identity through daytime affirmations that your ego immediately rejects. You can only change it by going deeper, to that level where identity is fluid and receptive, where your declarations are received as truth rather than questioned as fantasy. Now, I want to go even deeper into the specific mechanics of how you craft these declarations, because not all I am statements carry the same power. There's a specific quality they need to have, a certain resonance that makes them effective rather than just empty words. Leave a comment saying, I am becoming, if you can feel that your identity is not fixed, but rather something you're actively shaping with every thought you hold as you cross into sleep. The frontier between waking and sleeping isn't just a transition, it's a transformation of the very nature of what words mean and how they function. During your normal waking hours, when you think a thought or speak a word, it exists as information, as symbols that represent concepts. The word abundance is just a sound pattern that points to an idea about having plenty. But when you cross into that liminal zone, something fundamental changes about the nature of language itself. Words stop being representations and become pure vibrational frequencies. They're no longer pointing at something external to themselves, they're actually carrying the energetic signature of the thing they name. This is why the ancient teachers were so specific about timing. They understood that consciousness operates under different laws depending on what state you're in. In your beta brainwave state during the day, words are processed by the analytical part of your brain. They're examined, questioned, compared against your existing beliefs. But as you drift into alpha and then theta states approaching sleep, words bypass all that cognitive processing and go straight to the programming layer of your being. It's like the difference between reading the code of a computer program versus actually running that code and watching it execute. One is just information, the other is active transformation. The liminal state is powerful precisely because it's neither one thing nor another. You're not fully conscious with all your defenses active, but you're not completely unconscious either. You're suspended in between, and in that suspension, your entire system becomes remarkably open to reprogramming. Think of it like this. During the day, your consciousness is like a fortress with high walls and guards at every entrance. That's appropriate and necessary for functioning in the world. But every night right before sleep, there's a changing of the guard. The day shift clocks out. The night shift hasn't fully arrived yet, and for those few precious minutes, the gates are standing open with no one monitoring what comes in. Your conscious mind has been trained through your entire life to be that vigilant guardian. Its primary job is to maintain consistency, to ensure that nothing disrupts your sense of identity and reality. Every new idea, every possibility that doesn't match your current programming gets stopped at the gate and interrogated. Where did you come from? Do you have evidence to support yourself? How do you reconcile with what we already believe? Most new possibilities never make it past this gatekeeper because they can't provide satisfactory answers to these challenges. They don't have evidence yet because they're still potential, not yet manifest. and they directly contradict existing beliefs, which is exactly why they're needed for transformation. But when you hit that liminal state, this jealous guardian finally takes a break. It's been on duty all day, exhausting itself with constant vigilance, and as sleep approaches, it simply doesn't have the energy to maintain its defensive position. The gates swing open, and for those few moments, you have direct access to the depths of your subconscious, where your fundamental programming resides. This is where your core beliefs about who you are, what you're capable of, what's possible for you, all of this lives in a layer beneath your everyday awareness. During normal consciousness, it's protected, locked away, resistant to change. But in the liminal state, it's accessible, malleable, ready to receive new instructions. When you whisper, "I am abundant," or "I am powerful," or whatever declaration resonates with the transformation you're calling into your life, and you do this as that guardian is retreating, your words travel unimpeded to these deep storage areas. They're not being questioned or challenged or required to prove themselves. They're simply being received as new truth, new instructions for how your system should organize itself. And once they're planted at this depth, they begin working immediately to reshape everything above them. Your thoughts, your emotions, your behaviors, your perceptions, until your entire experience starts aligning with this new foundational programming. This is why people who practice this consistently report that changes happen in ways they can't quite explain. It's not that they suddenly started working harder or discovered new strategies. It's that something fundamental shifted in how they show up, in what they notice, in what opportunities they recognize, and how they respond to them. The change is happening at the root level, and everything else adjusts naturally to match. Now, I want to go even deeper into the actual practice itself, because understanding the theory is powerful, but knowing exactly what to do in those moments is what transforms knowledge into results. There's a specific way to craft your declarations that makes them exponentially more effective, and it has everything to do with matching the frequency of what you're claiming rather than just repeating words mechanically. Put in the comments, "The gates are open," if you're starting to recognize these moments when they happen in your own experience. The actual practice itself is beautifully simple, which is part of what makes it so powerful. Complexity creates resistance, and resistance is exactly what we're trying to avoid. The structure that's been refined over centuries and proven across countless lives is what's known as the practice of 7 nights. You choose one specific area of your life where you're calling in transformation. Not 5 areas, not everything at once, just one. Maybe it's your relationship with money and you want to shift from scarcity to abundance. Maybe it's your health and you want to move from feeling depleted to feeling vital. Maybe it's your creative expression and you want to go from blocked to flowing. Whatever it is, you identify that one area clearly. Then for 7 consecutive nights, you make this your practice. Right before sleep, as you're crossing that threshold we've been exploring, you whisper your declaration. 7 nights isn't arbitrary. There's something about this cycle that allows new programming to take root and stabilize. It's like watering a seed consistently for long enough that it can establish a root system. 1 or 2 nights might plant the seed, but it takes the full 7 for it to anchor deeply enough that it begins to self-perpetuate and grow on its own. The declaration itself needs to be crafted with care, but not overthought. This is where a lot of people get stuck, trying to create the perfect wording, the most elaborate vision statement. That's your daytime mind trying to control the process, and it actually weakens the power. Your declaration should be short, direct, and stated in present tense, as if it's already true. Not "I will be abundant," or "I want to be abundant," or "I'm becoming abundant." Just "I am abundant," period, full stop, stated as fact. The key is finding words that resonate with something your soul recognizes as true, even if your current circumstances don't reflect it yet. When you whisper, "I am abundant," and it feels completely hollow, like you're lying to yourself, that's a sign the declaration isn't quite right. But when you whisper it and something deep inside you says, "Yes, that's actually true on some level I can't quite explain," that's when you know you've found your phrase. It's not about your mind believing it logically, it's about your deeper self, recognizing it as a potential that's available to be activated. Some examples of powerful declarations: I am abundance, I am radiant health, I am creative flow, I am magnetic presence, I am deep peace, I am clear knowing. Notice how these are simple, present tense, and they describe states of being rather than specific outcomes. You're not declaring, "I have $1 million" or "I weigh a specific number." You're claiming the energetic state that would naturally attract and create those outcomes. You're programming the cause, not trying to force the effect. The practice itself takes maybe 2 minutes of your time each night. You're already lying in bed. You're already drifting towards sleep. You're just using those moments intentionally instead of letting them pass unconsciously. As you feel yourself starting to drift, as your body relaxes and your mind begins to soften, you whisper your declaration. Some people say it out loud in barely audible voice. Some say it silently in their mind. Both work. What matters is the quality of presence you bring to it, the sense that you're planting something real in fertile soil rather than just mechanically repeating words. You might whisper it 3 times, or 5 or 7, whatever feels natural. You're not trying to beat it into your subconscious through endless repetition. You're gently placing it there with intention, then releasing it and allowing sleep to do its work. The repetition across 7 nights is what builds the momentum, not saying it 100 times in one night. Think of it like visiting a garden and watering your plants consistently rather than drowning them once and hoping for the best. Now, I want to go even deeper into what happens during those 7 nights, because understanding the journey makes you more likely to stick with it even when your rational mind starts questioning whether anything's really happening. There's a specific arc that most people experience, and knowing what to expect helps you navigate it without giving up. Write in the comments, "I commit to 7 nights," if you're ready to actually do this rather than just think about doing it someday. One of the biggest barriers that stops people from even trying this practice is the assumption that it requires some special skill or spiritual development they don't possess. They think, well, this probably works for people who are naturally intuitive or who've spent years meditating, but I'm just a regular person dealing with regular life challenges. This probably isn't for me. And that assumption couldn't be more wrong. The reason this practice has survived across cultures and centuries isn't because it's exclusive to special people, it's because it works for anyone willing to apply it, regardless of their background, beliefs, or current skill level. You don't need to have spent a decade in an ashram learning advanced meditation techniques. You don't need to be able to visualize in vivid detail or achieve some altered state of consciousness that takes years to master. You don't need to be particularly spiritual, especially disciplined, or naturally gifted in working with energy or intention. The radical simplicity of this approach is precisely what gives it such universal power. You're working with a natural opening that happens in every human consciousness every single night. You're not creating something that doesn't exist. You're simply recognizing something that's always been there and using it intentionally. Think about breathing. You don't need special training to breathe. You've been doing it automatically your entire life. But you can also choose to breathe consciously, with awareness and intention. And when you do, it changes the quality of that breath and its effects on your system. This practice is the same. You've been crossing that threshold into sleep every night since you were born. You're already an expert at entering that liminal state. You just haven't been using it deliberately. All you're doing now is bringing conscious intention to something that's been happening naturally all along. The other trap people fall into is thinking that more must be better. If saying their declaration 3 times is good, then saying it 300 times must be exponentially more powerful, right? But that's not how this works. This isn't about overwhelming your subconscious through sheer repetition until it finally surrenders and accepts what you're saying. That's actually counterproductive because it comes from a place of force and desperation rather than trust and knowing. When you repeat something mechanically 100 times, you're essentially admitting through your actions that you don't believe it's powerful enough on its own, that you need to hammer it home through volume. Realign. Ancient practitioners understood that quality always trumps quantity when it comes to working with consciousness. 3 repetitions done with genuine presence, with your full attention and a sense of planting something real, will have far more impact than 300 repetitions done mechanically while your mind wanders. It's the difference between having a meaningful conversation with someone where you're fully present versus having someone talk at you endlessly while you zone out. Your subconscious knows the difference between genuine communication and empty repetition. What matters is the feeling you bring to the declaration, the energy behind the words. When you whisper, "I am abundant," and you can sense even the slightest resonance with that truth, even the tiniest recognition that this is actually available to you, that presence is what carries power. You might only say it 3 times before drifting off to sleep, but if those 3 times are infused with genuine intention and a quality of settled knowing that's infinitely more effective than mindlessly repeating it while your thoughts are somewhere else entirely. Find your natural rhythm. Some people feel called to say their declaration 3 times. Some prefer 5 or 7. There's no magic number that works for everyone. What you're looking for is that sweet spot where you've said it enough times that it feels anchored in your awareness, but not so many times that it becomes rote and loses its juice. You'll know when you've found that balance because the final repetition will feel complete, like you've planted something that can now be released to do its work while you sleep. Now, I want to go even deeper into what might happen during your 7 nights, because transformation doesn't always look the way we expect it to. There's often a progression that catches people by surprise, and understanding this journey helps you stay committed, even when the rational mind starts questioning the process. Leave a comment saying quality over quantity if you're recognizing that less can actually be more when it comes to deep transformation work. There's another dimension to this nighttime consciousness work that reveals itself when we look at healing rather than just manifestation or problem solving. Centuries ago, there was a woman named Jessica Martinez who served as a guardian in the night wing of ancient healing temples. These weren't hospitals in the modern sense. They were places where people came when conventional medicine had failed them, when their conditions seemed beyond hope, when they needed something more than physical treatment. Jessica's role was simple on the surface. She stayed awake through the night, watching over patients who were sleeping, making sure they were comfortable, attending to their basic needs. But Jessica was observant, and over time she began noticing a pattern that the daytime healers completely missed. The most profound healing didn't happen during the elaborate treatments and ceremonies conducted during daylight hours. It happened in the deep silence of night, specifically during those hours when patients surrendered completely to sleep. People who had been suffering with chronic conditions for years would experience sudden relief after one deep night's rest. Wounds that seemed resistant to healing would show remarkable improvement overnight. Cases that the master healers considered hopeless would inexplicably turn around, and it always happened during those nighttime hours when consciousness shifted into its deepest, most receptive state. What Jessica came to understand is that healing at its core isn't something you do to the body through external interventions alone. Real healing happens when the body's own intelligence is allowed to work without interference from the conscious mind's anxiety, doubt, and resistance. During waking hours, patients would lie there worrying about their conditions, focusing on their pain, reinforcing the reality of their illness with every fearful thought. But when they surrendered to sleep, especially that deep, complete surrender where they let go of everything, their body's natural healing capacity could finally operate at full strength. This brings us to something crucial about how this nighttime practice actually works, something that goes beyond the literal meaning of the words you're whispering. Your deeper consciousness, your soul if you want to call it that, doesn't primarily speak the language of words and concepts. It speaks in frequencies, in vibrations, in resonances. When you whisper, "I am abundant," as you drift towards sleep, yes, your subconscious mind understands the semantic meaning of those words. But what's really creating the transformation is the vibrational signature those words carry when you speak them with genuine presence. Think of it like music. You could read the sheet music for a beautiful symphony and understand intellectually what notes are being played. But that's completely different from actually hearing the symphony performed, feeling the vibrations move through your body, experiencing the emotional resonance it creates. Your sleeping consciousness responds to your declarations the same way your body responds to music. It's not analyzing the meaning, it's feeling the frequency. And when that frequency matches a truth that already exists at the level of your soul, when it resonates with a potential that's real, even if not yet manifest, that's when the magic happens. This is why two people can say the exact same words with completely different results. One person whispers, "I am abundant," as a desperate plea, hoping it might work but not really believing it, and their voice carries the frequency of lack and doubt. Another person whispers the same words as a quiet recognition of a truth they're claiming, and their voice carries the frequency of abundance itself. The words are identical, but the vibration is completely different, and it's the vibration that your deeper consciousness responds to. Jessica learned to listen for this quality in the patients she watched over. Sometimes a patient would be lying there in pain, but she could sense when their consciousness shifted into a state of surrender and acceptance rather than resistance and fear. In those moments, even though nothing had changed about their physical condition, she knew healing had begun because their vibration had changed. They'd stopped fighting what was and opened to what could be, and that opening is where transformation rushes in. Now, I want to go even deeper into how you can work with this vibrational aspect intentionally, because it's not enough to just understand it intellectually. You need to feel the difference between empty repetition and genuine resonance, so you can bring that quality to your own practice. Drop a comment saying, "I feel the frequency," if you're starting to sense that there's something beyond the words themselves, something in the quality of how you hold them that makes all the difference. Learning to work with frequency rather than just words requires understanding something that might seem counterintuitive at first. The most powerful part of your declaration might actually be the silence that follows it. The ancient masters who refined this practice over centuries paid as much attention to what happened between their words as to the words themselves. They would whisper their declaration, then pause, allowing that silence to fill with the resonance of what they'd just spoken. They understood that words create vibrations that continue to ripple outward even after the sound has stopped, and giving space for those ripples to expand and settle is what allows them to penetrate deeply. Think about dropping a stone into still water. The splash is dramatic and gets your attention, but the real beauty is in watching those concentric circles expand outward in the silence that follows. If you immediately drop another stone, you disrupt those first circles before they've completed their journey. Your declarations work the same way. When you whisper, "I am abundant," and immediately rush to the next repetition, you're not giving the first declaration space to complete its work. But when you whisper it and then pause, breathing naturally, allowing the vibration to settle into your awareness, you're creating the conditions for it to penetrate all the way down to where transformation actually happens. This is why rushing through 100 repetitions is not only unnecessary, but actually counterproductive. You're creating noise instead of resonance, chaos instead of pattern. The masters would often whisper their declaration once, pause for several breaths, whisper it again, pause again, maybe repeat it one more time, and then release it completely into the silence of approaching sleep. That pattern, that rhythm of sound and silence, word and space, creates a vibrational imprint that's far more powerful than continuous repetition could ever be. But there's something even more fundamental than learning to pause between your words. There's a natural rhythm, a frequency that's been present in you since before you were born, that your sleeping consciousness recognizes as its native language. Your deeper self doesn't need to be taught some special technique or trained to respond to elaborate formulas. It's been waiting your entire life for you to simply sync with the frequency it already speaks, and that frequency is as close as your own heartbeat, as natural as your own breath. Your heart has been beating in rhythm since you were a cluster of cells in your mother's womb. That steady pulse is your primary connection to life itself, the drumbeat that's been marking time in your body for every second of your existence. Your breath has been flowing in and out in its own natural rhythm, requiring no conscious control, no effort, just happening as the most fundamental expression of your being alive. These aren't random biological functions. They're the baseline frequency of your consciousness, the carrier wave that everything else rides on. When you align your declarations with these natural rhythms, when you whisper, "I am abundant" on an exhale, letting the words ride out on your breath, you're not imposing something foreign onto your system. You're working with the fundamental frequency that your deeper consciousness already recognizes as truth. It's like the difference between hearing someone speak in a language you don't understand versus hearing someone speak in your native tongue. Your sleeping mind might process words that are out of sync with your natural rhythm, but it deeply receives and responds to words that flow with the rhythm of your heartbeat and breath. This is why the most powerful practice often involves very few words spoken in sync with your breathing. Inhale naturally, allowing your body to fill with air in its own time. Then on the exhale, as that breath releases, whisper your declaration, letting it flow out on that same current of air. The words become inseparable from your breath, carried on the most fundamental rhythm of your being. Your subconscious doesn't hear this as something you're trying to impose. It experiences it as something that's already true at the level of your basic existence. Now, I want to go even deeper into how you can feel when you found that natural rhythm, because there's a quality to it that's unmistakable once you know what you're sensing for. Write in the comments, "I breathe my truth," if you're beginning to understand that the most powerful declarations aren't forced, but flow naturally with the rhythms already present in your being. There's another layer to this understanding that reveals itself when we look at people who discovered this principle not through ancient teachings, but through their own direct experience. Daniel Thompson was a fisherman, working the coastal waters, struggling like so many in his trade. He knew the techniques, understood the tides, could read the weather, but despite all his knowledge and effort, he was barely scraping by. His catches were mediocre, his income unpredictable, and every day felt like an exhausting battle with the sea that he was slowly losing. One night, unable to sleep because of financial stress, Daniel did something that made no practical sense. Instead of waiting for dawn like every other fisherman, he took his boat out into the darkness between midnight and sunrise. The ocean at night is a completely different world. The familiar landmarks disappear. The sounds change. The very quality of the water seems altered, and in that darkness, Daniel found himself whispering to the sea itself, speaking his intention out loud in the silence. I am abundance. I am prosperity. It felt strange at first, almost foolish, but something about the deep quiet of those hours made it feel right. What happened next changed everything Daniel understood about how reality works. His catches during those night hours weren't just better than his daytime fishing, they were extraordinary. Fish that were supposedly rare in those waters appeared in his nets. The quality was exceptional, and somehow mysteriously customers could tell the difference. They sought out his catch specifically, willing to pay premium prices for fish that seemed to carry something special, though they couldn't explain. What? Daniel realized he wasn't just fishing during different hours, he was fishing from a completely different state of consciousness. That nighttime state, when he was aligned with those deeper rhythms we've been exploring, was somehow transferring into everything he touched. Stephanie Wilson discovered the same principle from a completely different angle. She was a baker, but unlike others in her craft who worked normal hours, she found herself drawn to preparing her dough and tending her ovens during the pre-dawn hours, that mystical time between deep night and first light. She'd whisper her intentions over the dough as she kneaded it, declaring abundance and nourishment, while her consciousness was still in that expanded state that lingers after sleep. The bread she created during these hours developed a reputation that defied explanation. People would report that water stored in her ceramic vessels tasted unusually sweet and refreshing. Plants placed in her pots grew with abnormal vitality, producing larger flowers and more abundant fruit than made botanical sense. Her bread itself seemed to nourish people in ways that went beyond nutrition, leaving them feeling energized and uplifted in a manner they couldn't quite articulate. Other bakers tried to copy her recipes, her techniques, her ingredients, but they couldn't replicate the results. The secret wasn't in the external formula, it was in the state of being Stephanie brought to her work during those sacred hours. Both Daniel and Stephanie had stumbled onto the same truth that the ancient practitioners knew. Consciousness isn't contained inside your head, separate from the world around you. It's actually interpenetrating everything, infusing whatever you touch with the quality of awareness you're holding. During normal waking hours, that consciousness is fragmented, distracted, running on default patterns. But during those nighttime and pre-dawn hours, when you're still connected to that deeper state, everything you do carries a different frequency. Your intentions don't just stay in your mind, they transfer into your actions, into the things you create, into the very reality you're interacting with. This is why timing matters so profoundly. You could do the exact same actions with the exact same technique during regular hours and get completely different results. Not because the actions themselves are different, but because the consciousness behind them is operating at a different level. When Daniel fished at night, he wasn't just using different hours, he was fishing from his deeper self. When Stephanie baked in the pre-dawn darkness, she wasn't just following a schedule, she was creating from a state of expanded awareness that her daytime consciousness couldn't access. Now, I want to go even deeper into how you can recognize when you're operating from this expanded state versus your normal waking consciousness, because learning to feel the difference is what allows you to work with it intentionally rather than stumbling onto it accidentally. Leave a comment saying, I recognize the shift, if you're starting to notice the difference between your ordinary state and those moments when something deeper comes online. There's a perfect metaphor hidden in the process of making bread that reveals exactly how your nighttime declarations work. When a baker prepares dough, they don't immediately expose it to heat and expect it to rise. First, they cover it, place it in darkness and leave it alone. During those hours of darkness, something miraculous is happening that would be impossible in the light. The yeast is working, releasing gases, creating the structure that will allow the bread to rise and develop its texture. If you keep uncovering it to check on progress, if you expose it to light and air constantly, if you don't give it that protected darkness, the fermentation process gets disrupted and you end up with dense, heavy bread that never reaches its potential. Your dreams and intentions function exactly the same way. When you plant a declaration in that liminal space before sleep, you're not just thinking a thought that disappears. You're actually placing living potential into the darkness of your unconscious. And during the night, while you're not watching or analyzing or doubting, that potential is fermenting, expanding, developing the internal structure it needs to eventually manifest in your physical reality. But just like bread dough, it needs that period of darkness and non-interference to do its work properly. This is why so many people sabotage their own practice without realizing it. They plant their intention before sleep, which is perfect, but then they wake up in the middle of the night and immediately start checking on it mentally. Is it working? Do I feel different? Has anything changed? It's like a baker who keeps opening the oven door every 5 minutes to see if the bread is done yet. Every time you do that, you're letting out the heat, disrupting the process, preventing the transformation from completing naturally. Your intention needs that uninterrupted darkness to develop fully. It needs you to plant it, trust it, and then leave it alone to do its work while you sleep. Joshua Phillips understood this principle at a level that went beyond metaphor. He was a gardener, but not during the conventional hours when most people tend their plants. He worked in the midnight darkness, and when other gardeners mocked him for working, when he couldn't properly see what he was doing, Joshua knew something they didn't. Plants, like human consciousness, are far more receptive during the nighttime hours, not just to water and nutrients, but to the intentions and energy you bring to them. Joshua would move through his gardens in the darkness, whispering to his plants as he tended them. He'd speak to the seedlings about their potential, declaring the abundance they would produce, the beauty they would manifest. And in that darkness, something extraordinary would happen. The plants seemed to literally lean toward him, responding to his presence and his words in ways that were impossible during daylight hours. His gardens became legendary for producing vegetables of unusual size, flowers of exceptional beauty, and yields that shouldn't have been possible given the soil and climate conditions. What Joshua discovered is that darkness isn't the absence of growth. It's actually the ideal condition for certain types of growth. Seeds germinate in the darkness of soil. Babies develop in the darkness of the womb. Stars shine most brilliantly against the darkness of space. And your deepest transformations happen in the darkness of your sleeping consciousness, where they're protected from the harsh light of doubt, criticism, and rational analysis that would kill them before they could take root. The plants in Joshua's garden could receive his intentions more completely during the night because they weren't being bombarded with the full spectrum of daytime energy. They could tune into the subtle frequency of his words and presence without all the interference and distraction that daylight brings. Your consciousness works the same way. During the day, you're dealing with a million inputs, distractions, thoughts, reactions. But in the darkness of night, in that quiet space before and during sleep, you can receive and process subtle information that would be completely drowned out during your waking hours. Now, I want to go even deeper into what makes darkness such a powerful ally in transformation. Because most of us have been taught to fear darkness, to see it as something negative or empty. But what if darkness is actually the womb of all creation, the space where everything begins before it emerges into light? Put in the comments, "I trust the darkness," if you're starting to see that those nighttime hours aren't time lost, but rather time invested in transformation happening at levels you can't see but will definitely experience. We've been conditioned by modern life to see darkness as something to eliminate, to fear, to avoid. We flood our nights with artificial light. We keep screens glowing in our bedrooms. We treat darkness like an enemy that needs to be conquered. But this fear of darkness is actually fear of our own depth, fear of the unknown territories within ourselves where real transformation happens. Every wisdom tradition throughout history understood that darkness isn't empty or negative. It's actually the primordial substance from which everything emerges. Before light, there was darkness. Before form, there was void. Before manifestation, there was potential resting in the darkness of pure possibility. When you plant a seed at night, whether that's a physical seed in soil or an intention seed in your consciousness, something profound happens that doesn't occur with seeds planted during the day. Night seeds have access to a memory that daylight seeds have somehow forgotten. They remember their cosmic origins. They remember that they came from darkness, from that vast space before form, and this memory connects them to a power source that transcends the local conditions they're planted in. A seed planted in darkness doesn't just respond to the nutrients in the soil around it, it draws on something much deeper, much older, much more potent. Your nighttime declarations work the same way. When you whisper, "I am abundant," as you drift into sleep, you're not just planting that intention in your personal subconscious. You're actually connecting it to the cosmic matrix of abundance itself, to the source code of reality, where abundance isn't something you need to attract or earn. It's simply the natural state of existence. In darkness, without the interference of your waking mind's limiting beliefs, your intention can reach back to its origin and draw power from that infinite source. This is why transformations that happen through nighttime practice often feel mysterious or miraculous, like they came from somewhere beyond your personal effort. There's a story that illustrates this principle perfectly, taking us back to ancient Alexandria when it was the intellectual center of the known world. Amanda Chen worked as a scribe in the Great Library, but she wasn't assigned to the prestigious daytime shifts when important scholars and officials would come to have documents prepared. She worked during twilight and into the evening, hours that were considered less important, almost mundane. But Amanda began noticing something that puzzled her deeply. The decrees and documents she inscribed during those twilight hours seemed to carry a weight, an authority, a permanence that documents written during the bright daylight hours simply didn't possess. Contracts written at twilight were honored more faithfully. Declarations made during those threshold hours seemed to manifest more powerfully. People reported that reading texts Amanda had inscribed at twilight affected them differently, as if the words carried extra meaning beyond their literal content. Amanda started investigating the ancient texts in the library, looking for some explanation, and she found references to what the old masters called the eternal record, a dimension of reality where everything that truly matters gets inscribed permanently beyond the temporary physical documents we create. The ancient teachers understood that there are two levels of inscription happening simultaneously. There's the physical level, where ink marks paper, where words exist as external symbols. But there's also a deeper level, an eternal record that exists in consciousness itself, where truths get written into the fabric of reality in a way that transcends physical form. And the key discovery was that twilight, that threshold between day and night, is when the veil between these two levels becomes thin enough that what you write physically also inscribes itself onto that eternal record with unusual clarity and permanence. Amanda realized she'd been given this seemingly mundane assignment because the elders recognized something she didn't understand yet about the power of those hours. When you work in that liminal time, when you declare your intentions as day surrenders to night, you're not just thinking thoughts that will be forgotten. You're actually writing on the eternal record of your soul, inscribing truths that become permanent aspects of your being. This is why the practice of whispering your declarations at bedtime isn't just positive thinking or hopeful wishing, it's actual soul-level programming that can't be erased by tomorrow's doubts or next week's challenges. Now, I want to go even deeper into how you can sense when you've successfully inscribed something onto this eternal record versus just thinking thoughts that dissolve by morning. Write in the comments, "My truth is impermanent," if you're grasping that what you declare during these sacred threshold moments isn't temporary, but actually becomes woven into the permanent fabric of who you are. The understanding of reality as something solid and fixed is perhaps the biggest illusion we carry. Christina Patel discovered this truth through her work as a weaver in a tradition that stretched back centuries. While other weavers in her community saw their craft as simply creating textiles for practical use, Christina began to perceive something far more profound happening at her loom. She wasn't just weaving threads of cotton or silk, she was actually weaving reality itself, creating patterns that somehow manifested in her life with uncanny precision. Christina developed a practice that seemed impossible to anyone watching. Before beginning each piece, she would sit with her loom during the evening hours and whisper her intentions into the threads themselves. Not vague hopes or wishes, but specific declarations about what she wanted to experience in her life. Then, as she wove during those liminal hours between dusk and full darkness, she would hold those intentions in her awareness, feeling them become interlaced with the physical threads she was working with. The patterns that emerged weren't just aesthetically beautiful, they were prophetic. She could weave a design while declaring abundance, and within days, opportunities for prosperity would appear that perfectly matched the energetic pattern she'd created. What Christina came to understand is that reality itself isn't made of solid matter that exists independently of consciousness. Reality is actually woven from threads of intention, some conscious but most unconscious, some deliberate but most accidental, all interlacing to create the fabric of experience we mistake for objective truth. Most people are weaving their reality unconsciously, using whatever threads happen to be lying around, following patterns they inherited or absorbed without ever choosing them deliberately. But when you understand that you're the weaver, that those nighttime hours give you access to the loom itself, everything changes. Your declarations before sleep aren't just thoughts, they're threads you're consciously choosing and placing on your loom. The 7 nights of practice we discussed earlier is you weaving those threads together with persistence and intention until they create a pattern strong enough to hold, a fabric durable enough to become your lived reality. One thread by itself can break easily, but when you weave that same intention night after night, you're creating something with genuine strength and permanence. This brings us to the final revelation, one that ties everything together and shows you exactly what you've been given access to. Aaron Kim spent years studying ancient alchemical texts, searching for the legendary philosopher's stone, that mythical substance supposedly capable of transforming lead into gold, of transmuting base matter into something precious and valuable. He read thousands of pages, studied countless diagrams, tried to decode the symbolic language the old alchemists wrote in, and then one night, exhausted from his research, he had a dream that changed everything. In the dream, an ancient alchemist appeared and laughed at all of Aaron's searching. "You've been looking for the philosopher's stone in laboratories and ancient texts," the figure told him, "when you've been carrying it inside yourself your entire life. The philosopher's stone isn't a physical substance, it's your own sleeping consciousness. That's the alchemical vessel where true transmutation happens, where the lead of your limiting beliefs and fearful thoughts can be transformed into the gold of infinite possibility." Aaron woke up and immediately understood. The alchemists hadn't been talking about literal chemical processes, they'd been encoding wisdom about consciousness transformation in symbolic language to protect it from those who weren't ready. The lead represents everything dense, heavy, and limiting in your experience. The gold represents your highest potential, your most expanded self. And the fire that accomplishes this transmutation isn't external heat. It's the alchemical fire of I am, declarations made during that sacred space when your sleeping consciousness becomes the vessel, the laboratory, the philosopher's stone itself. Every night when you lie down and cross that threshold, you're entering the most sophisticated alchemical laboratory that exists. The declarations you make there aren't just hopeful statements, they're the actual catalyst that begins the transmutation process. Your sleeping mind takes the lead of I am struggling and transforms it into the gold of I am abundant. It takes the lead of I am limited and transforms it into the gold of I am infinite possibility. But it can only do this if you provide the catalyst, the conscious intention, the declaration made at the precise moment when the vessel is open and ready. Now I want to bring everything we've discovered together and show you exactly what happens when you commit to this practice. Because understanding the principle is one thing, but seeing the complete picture of transformation is what gives you the confidence to actually begin tonight. Leave a comment saying, I am the alchemist. If you're recognizing that you've always had the power to transform your reality, you just needed someone to show you where the laboratory was. So here we are, at the end of this journey through the hidden territories of your nighttime consciousness. If you've made it all the way through, that's not accidental. Something inside you recognized that this information matters. That these aren't just interesting ideas, but actual keys to transformation you've been searching for. And the fact that you stayed present through all of this tells me you're serious about actually applying what you've discovered, not just consuming information and moving on to the next thing. If this resonated with you, if something shifted in how you understand those 8 hours you spend in bed every night, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel. I don't create content just to fill space on the internet. Everything I share here is designed to give you practical wisdom you can actually use to transform your reality. And there's so much more we're going to explore together. The nighttime practice we covered today is just one gateway, and in upcoming videos we'll be going even deeper into territories that most people never discover. Leave a comment right now saying, "This message found me," if you feel like this video showed up at exactly the right moment in your life. I read every single comment, and I genuinely want to know that this connected with you, that you're part of this community of people who are waking up to their own power. And if you found value in what we explored here, hit that like button. Not because I need the validation, but because it helps this message reach other people who are ready for it, who are lying in bed night after night, not realizing they're wasting the most powerful moments of their entire day. There's a video right here that takes what we've discussed and shows you something even more profound about the morning gateway, that other threshold moment we touched on. Click and continue with me over there, because what you do in those first moments after waking is just as crucial as what you do before sleep, and together they create a complete cycle of transformation that most people never tap into. Tonight, when you lie down, you'll know exactly what to do. The laboratory is yours. The philosopher's stone has been inside you all along. Now you just need to use it. I'll see you in the next one.